I enter into Patapsco River at sunrise, hearing the water rush over the ancient rocks while fog hangs low over the valley. What if I told you that there was a peaceful trail that had survived hurricanes, floods, railroad expansion, industrial collapse, and centuries of human ambition? There is a contrast of what we usually see today in Patapsco Valley State Park compared to what it used to be. The valley had a very difficult past, and a very recent one at that. Many different floods, many expansions just going into the nature that was there, erosion. And I will get all into that. These places, they will remember everything, even though we tend to forget the history that existed there. Welcome back to Roxy's World Adventures podcast. I'm Roxy, your host, and this is one of the More You Know sections about Patapsco Valley State Park. This is the very first park that was created in Maryland. It was created a while ago, and I enjoy going there because it is the largest park or one of the largest parks in Maryland. So I enjoy going from time to time and just sitting around or hiking. A lot of people bring their kayaks down. Some people go fishing. It's a very bustling place for outdoor adventures. Anyone that likes to do anything outdoors. But there was a land before the parks. This land was used. We'll say that. It wasn't lived on, but the Susquehannocks and the Piscataways would often go to Patapsco to hunt or fish. For the most part, it was very abundant in fresh water. There was a lot of fish there that they could catch, and then the game was relatively large. You had elk, you had deer, you had black bear. So they were out there hunting all the time, and they used it as it was almost like they were semi-nomads. They were going through the park to get to other areas around. Usually these two tribes would get into battle over this area because they both used it and they both thought that it was theirs and it was their right to own until Europeans came in and they started colonizing. Just a fun fact here that I'm gonna, as a side note, Patapsco is actually originating from an Algonquian word, and this is what the Piscataways spoke, and it came from Patapscut, and that meant backwaters. It also meant tide covered by froth, and it also means rocky point. Usually they say that the backwaters is the one that kind of describes Patapsco. So that's how the river and the park got their names. It's just a little fun fact for you. The colonization happened, and the Europeans brought over diseases that the tribes weren't used to. So they were getting sick and dying off. And then, of course, the settlers were pushing them out because they saw it as a booming area for ports and mills and a bunch of industrialization. And therefore, they got pushed out of this area, and it wasn't claimed by either side. So they didn't really have claim over the territory to say you can't, or to try to fight over it. It just wasn't either of their territory to claim. So then the rise of the industry began. And this began in the 1700s and the 1800s. Maryland's Industrial Revolution made the shift to grain and iron. So there were a lot of grist mills, grain mills, ironworks. They were all built by the Patapsco River. It is a fast-flowing river, and it also has streams that come off of it that are fast-flowing, and that is perfect for power sources. So they decided that they were going to take over this area and use it to build industrial buildings on. The river basically became one of Maryland's economic engines, and Elkridge Landing was a major shipping port. There was just so much hustle and bustle and building, and expanding in this area. And not to mention, communities were growing around these mills. So people were coming in, building homes. So it was really taking over this area, and it was causing a lot of issues. So you could just imagine being one of those workers arriving early with muddy boots and trying to walk down all these muddy roads before sunrise. And they lived in the area. All the workers colonized there. So, I mean, it was just easy for them to walk to work. And there also was the rise of the B&O Railroad. And if you don't know what that stands for, it's Baltimore and Ohio Rail. And this is centered in Baltimore and Ohio. Shocker. But the first 13 miles of this railroad went from Baltimore to Ellicott Mills. And there was a bridge, Thomas Viaduct Bridge. And I talked about this in one of my posts on Instagram. So if you didn't tune in for that post, I'll just go into it. It was one of the first curved stone railroad bridges that carried cargo all the way from Baltimore to Ohio. So this park is actually filled with a lot of firsts. And I'll go into some of those as we continue on. But I already mentioned one was that it is the first state park in Maryland that was ever created. This bridge was created in 1835 and it still exists today. It still carries cargo. It still has trains that go through it, and it actually is the oldest in the world, which is pretty cool. So Patapsco Valley State Park is located in Maryland, and it's just pretty cool that they can carry cargo and all that stuff all the way up to Ohio, still on the same railroad tracks that were way back then. So that just goes to show kind of the cool stuff that exists out there in the world that you don't really know about. And a lot of people pass by the signs that are up. I always read them. I try to read them as often as I can because I really want to know what the history of the place is that I'm going to see. Because for me, travel is of value to learn. And it's not just to see pretty things. Pretty things exist all over the place. I mean, I can go out back and take a picture of flowers, that kind of thing. But I want to learn why this park was created. What was it created for? And that's what I'm kind of bringing to the table for you. The railroad's being built, people are moving in, industrial buildings are going up, and unfortunately, there was the tension between nature and industrial expansion. Basically, what happened was that unregulated waste was being dumped directly into the river from these buildings. It destroyed the wildlife. It caused insane erosion that led to one of the many reasons why flooding happened in this area. It destroyed the wildlife. I mean, the fish were dying, so there wasn't that kind of food there anymore. And it tainted the drinking water for all of the people that were living there. So it really goes to show that nothing is ever easy, right? Things never come without a price. There's always something that will happen. Opportunity always arises, but there's always some hardship that comes with it. And that's just the way of life. But this actually caused a major issue for the area. There have been 4 major floods in the area. 2 within the last 10 years. The first one that ever came through was called the Great Patapsco Flood, and that was in 1868. And a massive storm came through and major downpours to the valley, and the erosion also helped to cause the flooding, and it washed out bridges, all the bridges in the area. It destroyed the railroad tracks. They had to rebuild those. And the communities were underwater. So, I mean, it caused major devastation. And there's 3 more that came through. So then in 1972, Hurricane Agnes came in. And basically in this area, it dumped historic levels of rainfall. And it caused the river to crest up to 30 feet. above normal levels. It destroyed a dam, it destroyed communities, it destroyed all of the buildings. So all of those old mills and things that were preserved when the park became a park were now destroyed because of this flood. It was a major blow to the area. It was very unfortunate. People were upset, and it was just a bad time. And in 2016 and 2018, so this is kind of, I mean, it wasn't back-to-back years, but it was pretty close together. 2 severe floods came through Main Street in Ellicott City, Maryland, and destroyed infrastructure, and there were losses of lives. They didn't have the right procedures in place to prevent flooding from happening. And in recent years, they've really kicked things up a notch for projects in the park to try to prevent flooding from happening anymore. It really hasn't happened since then, knock on wood, but you never know. This park still exists regardless of whether or not storms came through. This park has extreme resilience. It's very lush. There's a lot of flowers. There's a lot of plant life. There's wildlife in the area, although most of it is small rodent animals and deer. I've never seen black bear in that area. I don't think they really hang out around there, but I mean, they might, maybe a rare 1 or 2 in there. But it's very interesting how nature is so resilient. And it kind of taught me how to be resilient and rebuild from learning that story. I mean, things happen in life, right? So you have to take the bad with the good. You might as well be resilient and rebuild after something catastrophic happens. And it was very hard to actually make this park a reality. In 1907 is when the park became what it was. Maryland recognized the need to preserve the valley. There was a need for conservation. There was a need for forestry because a lot was destroyed. And there was just a need for general flood protection. So they decided that they were going to make it a park, and it did. In 1907, it became Patapsco Forest Reserve. Now, the title didn't change until later on to Patapsco Valley State Park, but it became the first state park in Maryland, which is very cool, considering everything that exists within the park and all the history that surrounds it. It was based on 43 acres of land that was donated to the park by John Mark Glenn, and he donated it to the Maryland Conservation Division, but they continue to fight against this. Remember, I said earlier how the flooding still happened in 2018, and they decided to amp up those projects more and try to plant more trees, try to help the area. They got rid of the dams that were there to help fish come back, swim up river to be able to be back in the area. And people fish very often out there. It's very interesting how these parks kind of came into being. So in 1930, the Civilian Conservation Corps came into the park and created campsites, campgrounds, pavilions, visitor centers, buildings that could be used to help house the employees of the park and offer education and storage and just areas for people to recreate in. And that was Roosevelt's big thing, was that he wanted everything to be, he was the conservation guy. So he wanted to preserve all the parks, which is great. And he did a lot to help to get the park to where it is today. Public parks ended up becoming that place for escape, to heal, to grow, to exercise, all of that. And it's very interesting to see just what history is preserved in the park, because a lot of these buildings are destroyed, but the history is still there. All of that still matters today. Everything matters. Even though nobody really takes the time to learn it or study it, it's very interesting to see what is preserved. And just to change your point of mind the next time you go to a park, See it as a museum instead of seeing it as a park, and try to read those plaques when you walk by them. Read the signs, because there's a lot there that goes into the knowledge of knowing why these areas are preserved and exist in any park system, whether it be national parks or state parks or just parks and rec in general. It's always good to learn the history behind it so that you have a better knowledge of why, especially if you go to a park and you have a bad experience. Okay, you had a bad experience, but don't blame the park. That's not fair. You need to learn the history and learn why it's there. But it became a state park, and it's been kicking for a while. Now it's expanded to over 16,000 acres, from 43 to 16,000. That's wild. But there's so many different areas, so many different trails, different activities you can do, and it just makes for a great experience. And I hope you all are able to explore at some point. There are hidden landmarks inside the park that I have sort of talked about. The Thomas Viaduct Bridge, the Orange Grove Swinging Bridge. This bridge is usually where I park to start my hikes, at least when I'm in that area. And it's a really good landmark to just know and see so that you know you're getting close to where you started. There's a dam, and it was the first hydroelectric one. It still exists, and that was another first. That was the first of that kind. In town of Ellicott City, the trolley line number 9 can be hiked, and this includes areas of the B&O Railroad, which is pretty cool and a good history lesson along with some exercise and a hike. The Orange Grove Flour Mill, there's remains. It was obviously destroyed by the floods, so there's only what remains of the building there. There's an Agnes turkey truck. The remains of it are on a riverbank, but I believe it got destroyed during the tropical storm that came through. And then there's a lot of destruction in the town of Daniels. And a lot of it is from churches and relics and the sort, but they're deteriorating and falling apart, which it's pretty sad. But I've taken pictures of them. Unfortunately, a lot of them are covered in graffiti because people just don't know how to leave things alone. But there's some sort of haunting beauty about these structures that are just remains. And it's very interesting to read the plaques about them as well. And just seeing, forgotten paths and steps leading up to a door that doesn't lead anywhere, and things like that are interesting, and they lead into these ghost stories and urban legends and mysterious lore that surrounds the valley. So the one that I've been known to talk about is Hell House, which it was St. Mary's College, but that closed down in the 1970s. The remains of the building are still there, but there's also something else that lingers there. It's very haunted. It's known for, apparently there was a satanic cult that used to hang out in that area and do rituals, and there's definitely some sort of demonic activity going on there. But people have heard voices. They've seen an apparition of a little girl, and she gets red eyes and then comes at you, which sounds terrifying. I don't know if I would like to be involved in something like that, but it could be fun. I'm an adventurous person. You never know. There's also footsteps, but there's no upper floor. So you hear footsteps almost above you, but there's nothing up there, which is very eerie. There's also the ghost town of Daniels that I talked about. Everyone says it's eerie. I think it's eerie there, but I also think there's something hauntingly beautiful about it. But I also like weird things like that. So it's something that kind of intrigues me as well as makes me feel a little nervous. There is an old boarding school that exists on a hill in Ellicott City. It used to be called the Patapsco Female Institute, and there was a girl that went to school there, and she was waiting for her parents, but she fell very ill, and ended up passing away. She is known to be in that building. Many ghost hunters have gone in and, they've seen apparitions or heard little giggles. She still lingers there. So that's a spot to go to. Ellicott City itself has some hauntings where there's a lady in white that appears, and she generally haunts Main Street in the area, and she looks like she's dressed in colonial garb. There's also phantom children that play near the B&O Railroad, which is very interesting, and they are also in colonial garb. There have been spirits that have been seen of the mill workers that walk across the grounds or Main Street. There's also been phantom trains that have been heard. You hear the sound of a horn and no train ever comes. Hikers have people playing in the water and they look down and nothing is there. This is a place with a lot of history, and therefore there's a lot of energy that's still hanging around there. I love exploring places like Patapsco because it really changes your perspective on life. Like what I said before about how it went through so much and it stayed resilient and it still exists today and it's grown. It just kind of makes you think about yourself and how you can do these things just as well as an area can. If those trees can survive a hurricane and flooding, you can survive whatever you're going through. And just walking through the park, there's a bunch of different historical landmarks. There's a bunch of beautiful sights. I mean, there's waterfalls. Cascade Falls is lovely. It's not a huge waterfall, but the scenery around it and just basking on the rocks in front of it is something very special. And I like to go there from time to time just to, sit and think. I like to go in and sit and just bask in the beauty and journal. Adventure is really less about distance, right? I feel like it's more about awareness, being in the present moment, really seeing all the sights, smelling all the smells, learning everything that you need to learn. And that's why I do it, is because I want to know. I want that knowledge. It also helps you with mental clarity. You slow down a bit when you're adventuring because you're not on a timeline. I mean, sure, you're beating to raise the sun, but in the summer, the sun's up for much longer, so you don't really have to do that. And it's nice to just reconnect with nature, reconnect with yourself. I really want to encourage you, the next trip that you take, to really make it more about exploring and adventuring and taking in the history and the culture instead of just waiting around for the perfect trip. We all want to have that perfect trip, sure, but those little trips that change us are so much more valuable and important. There's so much more stories that exist right around the corner from your house than anywhere else in the world. You just have to go find it. Remember going back to that river at sunrise? Just think about all the history that exists there. When you look into the fog, you're almost kind of looking into the past. You're looking into years of history existing in the woods. And what if those woods could speak? What stories do you think they'd tell us? That's the episode of Roxy's World Adventures. Please follow Roxy's World Adventures for more stories where history, travel, healing, and the unexplained collide. Explore on.